Hello and welcome to another episode of PsycKicks. My name is Liv, and today we're going to be talking about part 2 of the Werewolf trilogy. If you're new to PsycKicks, hi, welcome. I'm glad you're here. This is the podcast where we talk about all things metaphysical, paranormal, spiritual, spoopy, and in between, because as a psychic medium, I think it's interesting. We talk about a whole bunch of other stuff. I mean, paranormal investigations, spirituality, but I'm on a rampage, no pun intended, about werewolves. And this is part 2. If you guys didn't listen to part 1, last week we talked about where the origin of the idea of a werewolf came from. So if you're interested in that, go check it out. There'll be a link in the show notes. But today we're going to be talking about more of like the werewolf witch trials, which sounds interesting because it is. I've talked about the witch trials in Europe specifically in a past podcast too. I think, let me see, what number was it? I think it was like 150 something. 131. Actually, it was podcast episode 131, and it's titled Witches, Cakes, and Reverse Critical Thinking. So if you want to learn more about the European witch trials to sort of fill in a little bit of the blanks of what I'm talking about historically, feel free to check that out on like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever you use to listen to podcasts. But today we're going to be talking about the witch trials or the werewolf trials that happened like synonymously, honestly, with the witch trials too, because it gets wild. But first, we're going to talk about like a little life update. I think people are enjoying the life updates. I got positive feedback in the comments if you're listening on the PsycKicks Extras YouTube channel. But yeah, I thought it would be interesting to share what's going on. So my husband and I took Oak, my son, to the beach. He will be 9 months in like a week and a half, and it's absolutely mind-boggling to me. Oak is my first baby, and I love him so much. It hurts me, physically hurts me to see how adorable he is every single freaking day. But we took him to the beach, and he's in the phase, as most babies are, of just everything that is within arm's reach goes into his mouth. And I was absolutely terrified that he was just going to eat sand by the fistfuls, and we'd have to leave, and it would be just not fun at all. But he did so good, you guys. Absolutely perfect. He didn't actually eat the sand. It was more like, okay, he was picking up fistfuls of the sand and just like squealing in happiness and excitement, like kicking his little feetsies everywhere and then dropping the sand. And the only sand that actually got in his mouth is like from the wind catching it, but just fistfuls of sand. Just, oh my goodness. I've never seen something so excited. Just in my entire life, he was so cute. It just, I loved it. And then what else? On a still personal, but not as like family oriented, I would say. I wanted to talk about this too. Another personal thing before I talk about, because it's like more spiritual. So personal thing with Oak, a little more spiritual. I have a friend who's a neighbor, and I love her. She's a fabulous human being. I actually, when Brad and I moved into our house, I was nervous like that we wouldn't make any friends with our neighbors because on our side of the street, everyone's kind of like grumpy, I would say is a nice way to put it. But everyone on the street behind us is a lot nicer. They all like have parties together and cookouts, and everyone knows everyone's name. It's cute. It's all cheersy, whatever. But we'd made friends with one neighbor who is just always outside. So when my husband and I would go on walks and things like that, we would stop and talk to them. And since we've had Oak, they like, I don't know, when did the best friends begin? The best friends started when I had Oak, and my friend, we'll just call her Carol. Carol came over and was like, oh my goodness, you guys had the baby. I'm not going to come in because I know how it is having a baby. You don't want germs, but we're going to leave this care package of a home cooked meal and like this Better Homes and Garden, like looking snack pack of like movie popcorn and like movie theater candy and a big, really cute container that said popcorn and like all these snacks and like drinks and like fun things. And our friendship has developed since then, but I didn't tell her I was a medium because when I went to her house, she had like the signs on her house that's like, Jesus loves you. This is the family where we eat, pray, love, things like that. Like the Christian lovely home decor. And I was like, oh no, she can't ever find out that I'm a medium, because if she does, we'll never be friends. She's going to hate me. She's going to think that I talk to the devil and yada, yada, yada. Well, I couldn't like live with just talking to her about like the weather, like, hi, how you going? Like, I didn't tell her about like what I did as a business, and that I have private professional readings with people, and that my main gist right now, besides being a mom and a wife, is being a psychic medium professionally and holding readings for people that want readings, because I talk to dead people. That is my core thing right now. Life purpose, wife, mom, professional medium. Those are the things that I'm doing. And I was just terrified. So I couldn't live with not talking to her about it anymore. So I finally just was like, I talk to dead people. And she's like, what? And she ended up actually being super into it. She started sending me stuff about like the shows on Netflix, like Kindred Souls, and like this other show where I guess they just use a REM pod all the time. And as soon as the REM pod goes off, everyone's like, oh my God, and like lose their poop on TV or whatever, like, because they're just freaking out over their REM pods and stuff. And she's like, is this the stuff that you do? And I was like, not really. I mean, yes, but not in the same way. So we've actually been bonding over it. But she actually used to be Catholic. And then because of like what I can summarize, I guess, and if she listens to this, she can correct me if I'm wrong, but from like religious trauma of being Catholic, she decided to convert to Christianity because she's found that it aligns with her values a lot more. And there's just things that she feels much more wholesome about and things like that. So the other day she was over my house, and, you know, as a medium, I'm spiritual. Even before I knew I was a medium, I think I was raised a little more spiritually. There wasn't ever like, this religion's wrong and you have to do that. And I never like went to church except for when I was over my friend's house and I would sleep over and we'd go to church on Sundays with her family, like that type of thing. But I've never really, like, I don't have a delineation, or I just like to learn about everyone's religion. I think it's interesting. So when she was outside, she came over and she was just talking to me, checking in on the baby during like middle of the workday or whatever. She was walking her dog, so she decided to stop by, and we were standing out in my front yard, and she goes, oh crap, I lost my mailbox key and I don't know where it is. And honestly, guys, I was like, well, I asked her, I said, Carol, did you actually like bring your mailbox key? Like, did you go to the mailbox? Because maybe it's in the mailbox. She's like, no, I didn't even have to go to the mailbox. I don't even know why I brought it. It's just like a, I don't know, muscle memory, I guess. So I'm like, okay. And I'm sitting there thinking, okay, well, maybe she just thinks she lost her mailbox key and it's not actually lost in my front yard in my super tall grass that I haven't mowed because my husband and I don't have time to do it right now. And like, it's just at her house where it should be hanging up. And she told me, she's like, no, I swear it was like, it's not in my little pocket and it's not on my phone. And I like, what am I doing with my dog Rex? Like maybe he knocked it out of my hand. And I was thinking, God, we're never going to find this. And I'm thinking, she's like, well, you're a medium. Can't you just tell me where it is? And I was like, oh, snap. You're hitting me with one of those. I can't do that. That's not how this works. That's not how mediumship works. And she's like, well, what do you mean it's not how it works? And I was like, I don't know. Maybe we should get a pendulum. Sometimes people will use pendulums and put them over a map of something. I can draw really fast a little map of my front yard, and then we can try and see if the pendulum will tell us where it is. And she's like, nah, hang on. My grandma always told me, because her grandma was still Catholic. She's like, my grandma always told me that you have to pray to St. Anthony, and St. Anthony will help you find whatever is lost. I'm sitting there going, psh, St. Anthony, what are you talking about? Are you kidding me with this right now? I'm like, no, I got to somehow fashion a pendulum. I don't even have a pendulum. I'm like, you got a lock of hair? We got a rock or something? Let me go find a napkin to draw on. And she says this cute little thing. And it was like, Tony, help me find, or what is lost, help me find, or what is lost now is found. Something like that. It was this cute little rhyme. And she was calling him Tony, like he's a soprano or something. And I shit you not, guys, literally in the spot I was just looking at with my peepers wide open. She goes, oh, look, there it is. And this mofo key was sitting right on top of the grass in front of us after at least a solid 10 minutes of looking. I am still absolutely astonished by this thing. And I can tell you that just a couple days ago, because that was like a month ago, maybe, give or take. A couple days ago, I was hanging out with her again, and she lost something in her house. And I was like, why don't you try that Tony stuff again? And she did. And the thing that she lost was there. I am like, I can't explain it. I can't explain it. I mean, aside from the fact that we just were not looking that hard enough, it's just the thing with the key, though. It was on top of the grass. It wasn't even like underneath it. Like, it was there for everyone to see. Like, someone had just magically like popped it right there on the top of the grass, right where I was looking just a second before. And I don't know. I just want to share it with you guys because it happened a second time with, like, I forget what it was in her house, like her phone or something. And I just, if you guys are looking for something in your house or whatever, you lost something, please do look up whatever it is that her grandma was saying, the Tony, St. Anthony little rhyme to find what is lost. And I need you to let me know in the comments below if you're listening on like Apple Podcast or the PsycKicks Extras YouTube channel, if it works, because it worked for her twice and I can't explain it. It's got me absolutely bamboozled. So, yeah, that's my like little segue into a little more spiritual things. The other thing that I've been talking, like, that keeps popping up in my mind. I have a really good friend, and we'll say her name is Sandy. And Sandy was telling me about how, like, frequencies are really important, and the elements that we are created out of, like, you know, the actual elements like carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, boron, I don't know, whatever you want. Those like periodic table of elements all have a certain frequency too. And now there's this new like actor guy or something. I don't know his name. My husband was just showing it to me like very quickly last night on the Joe Rogan podcast, where they're talking about how frequencies and matter all are intertwined. And if you are a longtime listener or you've seen some of the YouTube videos I've posted recently where I'm reacting to like the Garrett Watts Victorian Mansion paranormal investigation, I've really been trying to like explain to people how I receive information and understand how mediumship is plausible in the videos. And this whole frequency stuff with like matter. So I guess the person on the Joe Rogan podcast, he is talking about how he thinks the periodic table of elements should not actually be aligned by mass. So like the mass of each element, but instead by the frequency that the particles create or like emit. And anyways, I think I can't explain it more than that because I literally was just listening to my husband or listening to what the podcast that my husband was showing me last night, literally. And I'm just like, all this frequency stuff keeps coming up. So like I explain how I'm able to talk to souls and perceive energy because energy, your soul's energy exists at a certain frequency, just like the table or the chair or the floor that's around you exists at a certain frequency, making it a solid. A soul exists at a certain frequency, making it something that is not tangible, but it's still a form of energy. And because of that frequency, I'm able to interpret it in the form of communication when I'm channeling souls and spirits, etc. So it just, I don't know. I feel like in the future, I'm going to have to try and look more into this and like set aside some time to educate myself on the frequencies of matter and this periodic table thing and try to just understand how it goes together more with an understanding of spirituality. And possibly that will be a video or podcast topic. If you guys know anything about what I'm talking about, feel free to drop it in the comments below, depending on where you're listening, because I don't know, Sandy has a lot of things that she reads and talks about and just like bloops into my existence. And I'm like, why are you giving me such like mind altering things right now? I can't deal with it. I'm just trying to make a sandwich. And I feel like it would be a fun little tangent to try and go on. And if that's something you guys are interested in, please let me know. But without further ado, I hope you enjoyed my little update, but we're going to move on to my part 2 of werewolves and the werewolf trials. All right, so I didn't know this, but the werewolf trials in Europe are kind of synonymous to the witch trials. And there's a lot of different groups and certain trials or people that I could cover. And if one of those you guys know about I don't cover, please let me know what it is in the comments below. And I will try and cover it in a future podcast if that's something you guys are interested in. But I have a good array, I would say, of known and maybe some lesser known werewolf trial people and like the things that they've gone through. But that's what we're going to be talking about today. So the reason the werewolf trials and the witch trials are synonymous to one another is because they happened during around the same time. And the reason we don't really know that the witch trials were the werewolf trials is because when the people that were being accused of werewolves were being put on trial, they ended up being accused or like, I don't know, proven guilty in their reverse critical thinking ways that they were witches because the Roman Catholic Church or the religious governing agencies of the times when this was happening would categorize being a werewolf or suffering from lycanthropy, not in the mental illness way, which most of these things I believe are, but they would deem werewolf activity as, quote, witchcraft. And I didn't know that. So like a good portion or a portion of the witches that were accused in the European witch trials were actually originally accused for being werewolves. But because of the way the church and the people that were prosecuting these people were influenced by this new religion, the Catholicism, Protestants, whatever, it was just deemed as being witchcraft, even though it was werewolves. So like, I didn't know that. I thought it was really freaking cool. All right, so the European werewolf trials primarily took place in France and Germany, along with the surrounding countries from the early 15th century, peaking in the 17th century, and finally subsiding in the 18th century. So they happened synonymously alongside the witch trials because the Roman Catholic Church prosecuted werewolves underneath the category of witches or witchcraft. And during this period, the accusations of lycanthropy, which is the transformation into a wolf, were mixed with accusations of wolf riding or wolf charming. So I want to talk a little bit about wolf charming because I thought that was freaking interesting. So wolf charming was the accusation that the accused had used a form of magic to elicit a wolf attack against another person or their livelihood. In Bavarian folklore of the early modern period, a Wolfsegen or Wolfsegen was a protective charm against wolves. Conversely, the opposite of a Wolfsegen was a Wolfbahn, and this was a malevolent spell causing a wolf attack. So I thought it was interesting because, like, I don't know, everyone kind of knows that back then wolves were super scary. They could kill you. They could kill your livestock. They hunted in packs, so it was really hard. It wasn't just like someone trying to fight off one wolf, I would say, usually. So wolves were a very scary thing back then during this early modern period, which is, I guess, from the 15th century to the 18th century in this context. So Segen, because we're talking about a Wolfsegen and a Wolfbahn. So Segen in German-speaking Europe translates to meaning a blessing, charm, or incantation. It's like a positive thing. So while early examples of Wolfsegen survive from the late Middle Ages, the use of charms seems to have peaked during the 17th century when they were offered by professional wolf charmers. So the wolf charmers would use the Wolfsegen or the Wolfbahn, which align with the cold period known as the Little Ice Age. So during the 17th century, there was a period of time where the North Atlantic region of the world was experiencing not a true ice age because it didn't affect the world globally, but it was like a really, really, really cold time that happened between the 16th and the 19th centuries. Well, some experts say that the time span was actually from about 1300 to about 1850. So regardless, there was a period of like substantial cooling that was affecting the North Atlantic region, or i.e. the Bavarian Alps at this time. And it actually spurred I don't know if it actually, let me just say this. I don't think it spurred an increase in wolf population. There was actually a decrease of people during this time. They say that one of the reasons this happened, this little ice age happened, was because the plague had happened and a whole bunch of wars. So a lot of people had died and it led to a period of cooling. And at this point in time, wolf populations were actually really large in the Bavarian Alps. So if you're living in Bavaria or around the surrounding areas in the North Atlantic, you feel like you're just a little person with a lot of wolves around you, and it's really dang cold. So it makes sense to me that at this point in time, people would turn to their religion. And at this point, there was a lot of pagan people still too that believed in magic and things like that. And there was either good magic or bad magic, even with the rise of Catholicism or Christianity, that type of ideology or religion that was taking over. Even with that, there was certain sects of people that held on to their more quote unquote pagan ideas. And they thought that there was good witchcraft and there was bad witchcraft, which goes in to the Wolfsegen and the Wolfbahn. So, if you're cold somewhere and there's a lot of wolves and you are pagan, you're going to turn to that, I would assume. So, moving on. There is, however, no existing text about Wolfbahn, so the bad or malevolent opposite of Wolfsegen. However, there is surviving text of a spell reversing of Wolfbahn recorded in 1635. So in this text, it was said that a Wolfsegen or protective charm was used against a specific wolf earlier conjured by a Wolfbahn. So if there's Wolfsegens and Wolfbahns being taken or happening, being conjured or cast as charms and spells, etc., then there has to be someone that's doing it. And that person was called a Wolfsänger. So more generally referred to as a Sänger, these individuals were mostly destitute elderly men who made a living by selling charms or incantations. They were mostly tolerated in the 16th century, but from the 1590s, they began to be persecuted as witches because the church and prosecuting authorities believed that, quote, any magic was aligned with Satan and the devil and thus witchcraft. So during the early 1600s, a number of Wolfsänger were tried and executed as werewolves. Apparently, the Wolfsänger often used fraudulent scams in order to convince the peasants of their magical powers. So, were they maybe not always being like benevolent, happy soothsayers? Probably not. They were probably just trying to make a living like everyone else. And they probably at the time, because the little ice age was happening in the area of this, they were like, hey, there's a lot of wolves and not a lot of people. If you wear this lucky charm, insert like actual lucky charm here, around your neck, then the wolves aren't going to eat you, your family, and your livestock. So, I'm not saying it's right because it's not. However, everyone's trying to make a living in the little ice age. So anyways, these trials of the werewolf witch accusations persisted into the 1650s in Bavaria. So a typical example of this trial was one of Thomas Heiser, and he was aged 84. Could you imagine being 84 in this period of time? That's ancient. Most people only live to be in their 50s, 60s. So to be 84, that's really good. So anyways, according to the protocol, Thomas Heiser underwent the first stage of torture because he was a Wolfsänger. So he went under the first stage of torture before confessing to know how to perform the, quote, Wolfsegen, which he said he had learned from a friend some 50 years earlier in Innsbruck. and he had made a living by performing it for the peasantry. So for like 50 years, he was like, I'm going to be a Wolfsegen. And I learned it from my friend. He says, you know, we can do these rituals, step on your left foot, don't forget it, and it'll keep people safe. So I don't know. I feel like not everyone has malicious intent. And maybe this Thomas Heiser didn't. Maybe he was just trying to do what he thought he could to help people around him 50 years, and now he's 84. So anyways, he claimed to be able to call wolves to attack a specific head of cattle and to have done this a total number of 10 times over a period of 40 years. And he confessed that he had promised his soul to the devil in order to learn the charm. So let's dissect this a little bit. If he's a Wolfsegen, then he is just someone trying to protect people in a way. Hopefully, I mean, it says right here that he underwent the first stage of torture. So I'm sure that during the first stage of torture, being 84 years old, like even if we go back to the witch trials podcast that I did, they did so much torture to people where they just would they called it the pricking method, where they would just prick and poke and poke people until it didn't elicit a response. And then they're like, oh, you're a witch, you can't feel it. And it was the most backwards crap I've ever heard. And there's more. Go listen to it. I don't even remember all of them. They were so ludicrous. But if you're 84 and someone's like, yeah, I'm going to torture you, you're probably going to be like, hey, yeah, I learned how to do this from my friend 50 years ago. But it says his friend. And then I'm sure they probably tortured poor Thomas even more. And he was like, oh, yeah, actually, specifically, I can do this to make a whole head of cattle be attacked by wolves. So maybe at this point, he's like, hey, I'm going to try and scare these people into letting me go. Like, I'm this powerful. I can do this. And if maybe you don't let me go, then I will, bequeath this rampant pack of wolves on your family. He's been doing it for 50 years. Maybe he's trying to fake it a little bit, fake the funk. Because if you're going to be accused of the funk, you may as well as fake it to try and make it. But I don't think he did, obviously, because he says, oh yeah, I actually promised my soul to the devil. How does it go from, I learned this from my friend, he taught me 40 years ago, to I'm really powerful, but I also had to sell my soul to the devil? It's just, all this stuff always goes back to just people being tortured into confessing things that probably aren't true. I mean, anyways, moving on. All right, in Vienna, there is a custom in which the text of Liber Generationis Jesu Christi from Matthew the 1st, I guess that's the beginning of the gospel, was known as Wolfsegen. So this part of the text was known as Wolfsegen because it was chanted in a particular way after Mass on Christmas night. And supposedly chanting this was to commemorate the banning of wolves by singing the gospel in former centuries before the city was fortified. So in Vienna, people would get together and sing this gospel as Wolfsegen in order to try and protect their city, which I thought was kind of cool. I mean, it's kind of endearing. All right, so we said that the wolf trials happened in France, Germany, and the surrounding countries. So we talked a little bit about Bavaria, we talked about Vienna, and we know that these areas are in a little bit of a, quote, little ice age. So everything's cooling. There's less people because of the plague and all this other stuff that's going on. And there's a lot of wolves everywhere. People are scared. There's a lot of religious differences happening where some people are still practicing their pagan beliefs while the kings and clergymen, the people running the country, are turning towards, Protestant Catholicism, those religious affiliations. So in France, let's talk about what happened in France a little bit with the werewolves. I should also preface this so that if you didn't listen to last week's podcast, we did talk about lycanthropy and the idea of it being a actual mental illness, where at one point the Byzantine Empire, also referred to the Eastern Roman Empire, whose proper name is Romania, there was a idea that lycanthropy was actually and this was during the Middle Ages. They figured out that it is actually a mental disorder that is where people suffer from melancholic depression and psychosis, where they actually believe that they're like transforming into a certain type of animal. So when I talk about lycanthropy in these texts, though, and European ideologies of it, people thought lycanthropy was where people actually turned into animals. So the people of the Byzantine Empire knew that it was a mental illness, but with all of the religious things happening, people were vilifying it and saying, oh, well, it's witchcraft. It's a part of Satan and the devil and all this other stuff. So that's what we're talking about in this context. But there's a little bit of an overlap if you really listen. And it's kind of very sad and scary all at the same time. So anyways, let's move on to what was happening in France during the werewolf trials. So in France, in 1598, near Angers, France, 2 hunters came across the remains of a 15-year-old boy that 2 wolves were feasting upon. When the men approached, the animals quickly retreated into the forest. The hunters gave chase and tracked the wolves through the woods, where they stumbled upon a half-naked, shivering man hiding under some brambles. He was covered in blood, and small pieces of flesh were held in his hand. Immediately, the hunters were suspicious of the man and brought him to local authorities. The man was later identified to be a local beggar by the name of Jacques Roulet, and in his investigation, the authorities, found that the flesh in the man's hand was to be human, and after questioning him, he admitted to killing the 15-year-old boy. Jacques was arrested and put on trial, where he confessed to being a werewolf. In a statement, he said that his parents years ago had given him a salve to drink, and it bestowed upon him the ability to transform into a wolf. Jacques claimed his brother and cousin also received this power, and he continued to say that the 3 of them had killed and eaten the bodies of other children, just like the 15-year-old boy that they had found. Which, if you think about it, I mean, when the hunters found this guy, they said that there was 2 wolves eating the body, and then this guy was just like in the woods by himself having issues, apparently, presumably. So I don't know. That's what I was thinking when I was reading it. I was like, this Jacques guy probably was like, oh yeah. I mean, if you're that just not in tune with reality, to put it nicely, at that point in time, I'm sure if this is true and it was happening like it was stated, he might have even thought that those 2 wolves that were with him were actually like his cousin and his brother. Because I don't know, if you're that scary out of it, the wolves are probably going to leave you alone, because that's a little scary. So the local authorities investigated the parents of Jacques and found them to be in good standing, along with the brother and his cousin. And Mr. Roulet was convicted later of murder, wolfism, along with cannibalism, and he was sentenced to death. Jacques appealed to the Parliament of Paris and was confined instead to a mental institution for 2 years after being judged to be not of sound mind. So Jacques Roulet is among many documented cases where convicted murderers were alleged to be werewolves. These are debates whether these accounts were the result of delusion of the mentally unstable, drug-induced hallucinations, or fabrications forced to confess under torture, which I feel like in so many of the instances that we're going to cover after this is just a little bit of all 3. It's so sad, but it's also infuriating, because it's like, I don't know. It's not just, you can't, I don't know. I feel like you can't just let go of someone's wrongdoings because of mental instability, because it's still wrong what they're doing. But it's also like, we need to understand why they're doing what they're doing and not necessarily vilify them, but just be like, what can we do to, I don't know. Let's just keep going. This was a lot for me to try and research and try to figure out. It's just, yeah, I don't know. A lot of mental illness in this. So in France, we also have Gilles Garnier. So he died the 18th of January in 1573 and was a French serial killer, cannibal, and hermit convicted of being a werewolf. He was alternately known as the Hermit of Saint Bonnet and the Werewolf of Dole. So this one also just makes me sad, but it's also, it doesn't get rid of the atrocities that happened. The Werewolf of Dole, also known as Gilles Garnier, was a reclusive hermit living outside the town of Dole in a province of France. I think it's Franche-Comté. And he recently had been married and moved his new wife out to his isolated home. Being unaccustomed to feeding more than just himself, he found it difficult to provide for his wife, causing discontent between them. During this period, several children went missing or were found dead, and the authorities of the French province issued an edict encouraging and allowing the people to apprehend and kill the werewolf responsible. So they knew I guess they thought there was a werewolf responsible. That's interesting. One evening, a group of workers traveling from a neighboring town, they came upon what they thought in the dim light to be a wolf, but what some recognized as the hermit with the body of a child. Soon after, Gilles Garnier was arrested. So these workers were just traveling from a neighboring town, and in the dawn or dusk, I guess, probably the dawn, I don't know, walking from one place to the next. See, all right, this is where like mediumship comes in, maybe. I don't know. It might just be my head movies. I don't have the I'm not going to say this is real, but I feel like the people that were walking past this man were coming home from like a bar or something. The people that found Gilles in his extremely compromising and tragic situation on both ends, and they were maybe drunk, because I feel like it was the morning time when this happened. But they found the hermit with the body of a dead child, and soon after, Gilles was arrested. So, according to his testimony at trial, Garnier was in the forest hunting one night, trying to find food for himself and his wife, when a specter appeared to him, offering to ease his troubles, and gave him an ointment that would allow him to change into the form of a wolf, making it easier to hunt. He confessed then to having stalked and murdered at least 4 children between the ages of 9 and 12. And it's just not good at all. In October 1572, it was said that his first victim was a 10-year-old girl from Dole, and he would, with each subsequent killing that he had between girls and boys of various ages, like 10 to 12, 9 to 12, as it was said, he would eat parts of them. Some people he didn't actually get to eat. He just killed them because he got spooked by people that were walking near him, and he just ran off into the forest. I don't know. But he would bring pieces of them back to his wife, his victims, these poor, poor children, and feed them to her, which is just absolutely grotesque and horrible. Reading this just gives me a bad taste in my mouth. So Garnier was found guilty of, quote, crimes of lycanthropy and witchcraft, and he was burned at the stake on January 18th, 1574. So again, crimes of lycanthropy, they thought that was literally turning into a wolf at the time. So it wasn't him being insane or mentally unstable or suffering from an illness. They really thought that he could turn into a wolf and try to eat people. And thus the witchcraft because of the ointment. Even though Garnier was burned at the stake, his trial was done by the secular authorities and not by the Inquisition, because at this point in time in France, there was an Inquisition that was a little bit separate with the religious dictations that were happening. Because it just says because the Inquisition wasn't used, because superstition wasn't judged by the Inquisition, because this was seen as superstitious things. So more than 50 witnesses said that he had attacked and killed children in the fields and the vineyards of Dole and around, and they had seen him devouring their raw flesh. And he was sometimes seen by these people, quote, in a human shape, and sometimes in I think it's called a loup-garou, which is just a French word for werewolf shape. And I'm just, I don't know. It makes me really sad and angry because, like, being a serial killer is bad. But also, I was looking up, if you're hungry enough, you will have delusions. And I don't know, like, being a mom now with my son, I was wondering when I could give him water. And if you guys didn't know this, you're not supposed to give your babies water before the age of 6 months, because what happens is if you give them water instead of formula or just breast milk, then they can have a nutrient deficiency because their blood actually gets too watered down, and it can lead to like seizures and things like that. So I'm just thinking, like, if you're that starving in the forest and you have a life and you're just don't know what to do because you're a hermit, you don't have a job, you don't have sheep, you don't have anything, and your wife's like, hey, I'm hungry. What are we supposed to do? We live in the forest. We don't even have a farm. Like, what am I supposed to live off this here mushroom? And he's like, gosh darn it, what am I supposed to do? And then he might be starving himself and have a delusion of seeing a specter, which is just like a fantastical or phantom like thing, delusion, hallucination, and then just literally went cattywampus and was like, I'm just gonna try and eat people because it's easier than trying to eat animals, and like literally was just suffering very bad from maybe nutrient deficiencies that led to psychosis. And it just, I don't know, it's just interesting and sad. So, all right. Now let's talk about the witch or the werewolf trials in Livonia. So let's touch upon the religious pagan ideas, I guess, which gives you a little more clarification as to how people viewed werewolves versus the Roman Catholic Church and their like pagan religions. So in Livonia, the indigenous peasantry, in contrast to the Baltic German boggers and nobility, often continued to conduct pagan worship in defiance to both the Christian church, the authorities, and nobility during the entire 17th century. Consequently, they did not believe in Satan and therefore not in witches or satanic pacts. However, they did believe in both malevolent magic as well as the existence of werewolves, though they did not associate them with Satan as the church and the authorities did. So that just gives you a little more clarification, as like they recognized the Wolfsegen and the Wolfbahn, but they didn't see them as like satanic or anything like that. But when they were like, hey, you put a Wolfbahn on my family or my herd and I lost things, you are a Wolfsegen and I don't appreciate you, then, you know, when those people got prosecuted by the authorities, they were like, you're a werewolf and you're a witch, burn them, because it goes against their Roman Catholic religion. And they thought that they were like making pacts with the devil, getting ointment, having Sabbaths, stuff like that. So here is the story of a man from Livonia where he talks about not as much of a terrible thing where everyone just dies, but I thought it was an interesting story. So there's Thiess of Kaltenbrun. So the werewolf was not always regarded as evil in the Baltic, and a notable case in Jürgensburg in Livonia, which is present-day Latvia, in 1692 follows a similar pattern, but it did not end in a death sentence as Garnier in France did, and a lot of other like German and French people that ended up being serial killers and just bad things. So 80-year-old Thiess confessed to being a werewolf who, with other werewolves, regularly went to hell 3 times a year to fight the witches and the wizards of Satan to ensure a good harvest. And the court tried to make Thiess confess that he had made a pact with the devil and that the werewolves were in service of Satan, but the court did not succeed. And instead, 80-year-old Thiess was sentenced to be whipped on the 10th of October, 1692. But like, let's just talk about this. Not only did he not get a death sentence because he refused at 80 years old to confess that he had made a pact with Satan, he was like, listen, are you not hearing the words coming out of my mouth? 3 times a year, me and my buddies go down to hell and we literally battle as werewolves, the wizards and witches of Satan. So, like, honestly, instead of whipping me right now, you should be thanking me because I'm keeping you guys safe and ensuring a good harvest. It makes me think like Dante's Inferno a little bit. Like, this dude, Thiess, is just like traveling down in a pack of werewolves, going for justice, fighting for the good, fighting for the little people, fighting the good fight. Anyways, moving on. Let's get on to some really scary things that happened in Germany, most notably that of Peter Stumpp. So this is a pretty grisly case. It's more grisly than the French cases. So I'm going to try to make it not so terrible, but it's pretty terrible. It just goes with the trend of werewolves being actual lycanthropy, which is melancholic, depressive, psychotic disorder. And it's not good. So I feel like a lot of these people during the time, since it was the times, they had mental disorders or illnesses. But even if they didn't, they used the guise of lycanthropy to try and like be like, oh, I wasn't crazy. This was actually just happening. I was turning into a wolf. But I feel like it was more just the fact that there was a lot of instability happening for lots of different reasons, whether it be being starved or the religious pressure and persecution happening. But anyways, let's talk about Peter Stumpp, aka, I think his actual name was Peter Griswold. But he got the name Stumpp because he was missing his left hand. So he did not seem like a very cool dude, but it also seems like with everything in life, you need to understand why someone is the way they are because of the things they've been through, which that understanding of those things about that person doesn't give them permission or make it okay for the things that they're doing. It just explains why they're doing the things that they are and why they are the person that they are, but it doesn't excuse their actions. That's probably the most important thing to remember in this podcast when I'm talking about this stuff. So his story was discovered in a 16-page pamphlet published in London in 1590, but it was mostly rediscovered in 1920 by occultist Augustus Montague Summers. So in Germanic mythological systems, which underpinned laws and court rulings, it was held that if a werewolf's left forepaw was cut off, the same injury appeared on the man. And I guess, Peter Stumpp was missing a hand. So they were like, if you're a werewolf and you get attacked as a werewolf, that injury is going to be the same when you turn or transform back into your human body. So they were like, evidence of a werewolf? I think so. So in this pamphlet, it provides trial notes and witness statements that can be found recorded in other publications as too. So like they cross-referenced this pamphlet that they found that was made in 1590 that this dude Augustus found in 1920. So the pamphlet basically says that in 1589, Peter Stumpp was arrested and formally accused of being an insatiable bloodsucker, and evidence was provided that he had gorged on the flesh of goats, lambs, sheep, as well as men, women, and children for over 25 years. Facing the prospect of torture, Stumpp confessed to having murdered and eaten 14 children and 2 pregnant women. I'm not going to talk about what else he said in detail about the eating, mutilating, and like killing of these people. But he also says that he confessed to having incest with his daughter and intercourse with a succubus whom the devil sent to him for him. So obviously there's a lot of things that he was going through and not handling in a very good way, possibly, I would say. So anyways, just not a good dude, not in a loose mood. Well, probably in a very loose mood since he's doing all the things that he's doing, but not a good dude. So just before being stretched on a rack, Stumpp confessed to having had practiced black magic since he was 12 years old and said that the devil had forged and given to him a magical belt enabling him to metamorphose into the likeness of a greedy, devouring, strong, and mighty wolf with eyes great and large, in which the night sparkled like fire, had a great and wide mouth with the most sharp and cruel teeth, and a huge body with mighty paws, which Dude sounds like he's goading right now or gloating, but anyways, he said that once he removed this belt that the devil gave him, Stumpp would transform back into his human form. So like all of these murders and things that he alleged that he was accused of and talked about, he was very cool, like explaining, he said that he was a wolf. So after his trial, there was an extensive search of Peter's farm. And I guess he was like actually a pretty wealthy farmer in Germany at this point. He like lived near Cologne. But no magical belt was ever found. Ever. Not even resembling like what he said. So Stumpp was finally put to death on October 31st, ooh, spooky, 1589, in an extraordinarily violent manner. Just like really, really bad. So I guess what was happened was that he was strapped to a wooden wheel and, quote, flesh was torn from his body in 10 places with red hot pincers, followed by his arms and legs. Then his limbs were broken with the blunt side of an axe head to, quote, prevent him from returning from the grave before he was beheaded and burned on a pyre. I mean, that's a lot. Sounds pretty not okay. But he also did really not okay things. So I let's keep reading, because you start to understand maybe why he did the things he did, or at least why he was the way he was and thus did the things he did. But in addition to Stumpp being killed in that atrocious and very gruesome manner, his daughter and, quote, mistress, because he was like, I have sex with my daughter, were flayed and strangled and burned along with Stumpp's body as a preventative measure against, quote, similar wolfish behavior. There's actually a composite wood print by Lucas Mayer that is of the execution of Peter Stumpp in 1589 at Bedburg near Cologne, where you can see that there was a torture wheel erected on a pole with a figure of a wolf on it, and then it was topped by Peter Stumpp's head, and then there's just like the fire in the back and depictions of him being poked and like beat up with a axe head. So not maybe the best, but there's a picture of it. So anyways, a lot of people actually now believe that this was a political move by the changing hands of government of Germany at the time. So it might be relevant that the block of years in which Stumpp was said to have committed his crimes, which was between 1582 and 1589, were marked by internal spiritual and political warfare. The electorate of Cologne was in upheaval upon the introduction of Protestantism by the former Archbishop Gebhard Tricius von Wulberg, and Stumpp was an early convert or converted person to Protestantism and fought in a war which historians claim brought uncontrolled violence out of soldiers from both sides. So, when I'm saying trying to understand why people are suffering from whatever it is that they are, mental illness, mental instability, psychosis, whichever, like Giles, it seems like he might have been under psychosis because of hunger. This guy, Peter Stumpp, might have been under psychosis because he fought in a war where the effects of the war took really, really bad tolls mentally on the soldiers. So this might have been what caused him to become so ill and carry out the atrocities that he did. Again, that does not excuse your horrible, atrocious behaviors, but it's just like when we're trying to understand, like when people are like, werewolves are real, lycanthropy is a mental disorder that people now recognize in psychiatry and that people had recognized in early Romania from the Eastern Roman Empire. So like it just, that's what I'm talking about. Anyways, back onto like the religious warfare side of this. So, there was being a convert of Protestantism in Germany. And I guess during this time, Stumpp was converted to be a Protestant, quote unquote, during the times that he did these things. But in 1587, the Protestants were finally defeated, and the new Lord of Bedburg, Werner Count of Salem, I think it's Rieferschied Dyke, made Bedburg Castle the headquarters of his Catholic mercenaries who were determined to reestablish the Roman faith. So we went from, Protestantism now to the Roman Catholic Church being in charge. And they're like, we're going to take everyone that converted to Protestant and put them back to being Roman Catholic. Or maybe they were pagan before that. But like, we can't have all these Protestants. We need the Roman Catholics. So it is proposed that allegedly this horribly gruesome execution of this cannibal serial killer Peter Stumpp Griswold is actually also a religious tactic in order to scare people from the German elite, like the German elite to scare the commoners into being Roman Catholic, because they were like, look, Peter Stumpp was a Protestant. He was a werewolf. He was a terrible human being. Protestants only make like terrible, psychotic serial killers that eat children. You don't want to do that. Be a Roman Catholic. And then also, to top it off, we're going to execute him in one of the most vile, gruesome ways you possibly could. And yeah, so I thought that was interesting. Now, the last thing I want to cover is full moons. Why are full moons associated with werewolves? I looked it up briefly, just a tidbit. So if you guys have more information, make sure to let me know in the comments below. But I guess people think, and it's not even like backed up by any sort of like research or evidence, that wolves howl more during full moons. And that there is some people that believe that when a full moon is out, people feel the difference between primal and human traits, and there's like this balance. So I guess in like pop culture, full moons started being associated with werewolves. But anyways, did you all enjoy my dissertation on the werewolf trials and some of the atrocities that happened during them? Question mark. If not, don't tell me, because I'll cry. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you guys want more content like this, please make sure to, I don't know, subscribe, follow. I think it's follow on podcasts, and let me know what you guys think I should cover in a next podcast. I have lots of ideas, but I would like more ideas from you guys too, because then I can try and research more things and bring more good content out, stuff like that. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I do have more readings if you guys are interested in readings. I have availability for June with new hours. So go down into the show notes or the link in the description below if you're listening on the YouTube channel, and check out on our website availability. If not, that's okay too. Until next time, I hope you guys enjoyed this podcast. I appreciate everyone that's listening. And yeah, we'll see you next Sunday. We are your PsycKicks. Peace.